Bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular public meeting of the Dieppe City Council this April 22nd. Without any further ado, I'm missing one here.
Non, il manque la chose des Amérindiens.
Elle est au fond, là, la grosse page blanche en dessous.
Bon. Ça paraît qu'on est en retard parce qu'on n'est pas organisé.
You can tell that we're late here. We're a little disorganized. So the city of Dieppe recognizes that the land on which it operates is part of the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And dear colleagues, let's have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We will now call the meeting to order and a confirmation of quorum. We do have quorum. Let's move on. Are there any conflicts of interest by council members? None? No conflicts? Let's move on then. We are now at item 7, presentations, inquiries. No, I'm sorry, the adoption of the agenda, of course, sorry. So I need a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Jeannet on the question. All those in favor will signify by saying yes. Contrary, nay. Carried. Item 7, presentations, inquiries, and petitions. 7.1, inquiries by council members of the Kodiak Regional RCMP. And as quite frequently, we have Inspector Chantal Farah here this evening. Good evening and welcome. I'm still missing something.
Oh, voilà, merci. Les choses à droite sont d'habitude à gauche. OK.
Merci,
Voilà.
Monsieur le maire.
Merci.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, councillors. I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the complaints that we've received in the last few weeks on break-in entries in the city of Dieppe. We've had a few incidents of theft in apartment buildings on Gauvin and Normandy Street. In certain cases, the thieves went to the laundromat, and others they went to the mail boxes and stole some mail from inside. I've also noted some break and enters in some sheds, and objects such as bikes and tools have been stolen. In certain of those cases, they were on Halfby Street, Gaspé, Croissant Fidèle, amongst others, close by. And there was another non-urgent incident that was reported to us at 857-2400. Or if you do have an incident that is not urgent, please call us at 8757-2400 or put your report online on the rcmp-rcmp.gc.ca and choose New-Brunswick. And of course, you remain anonymous as well if you want to report anything on Crime Stoppers. And I'm talking about this because we know with the good weather, people are a little more mobile, and we usually do see an increase in the number of break-ins in sheds and into vehicles. And I have started to note it, as a matter of fact. So just generally speaking, for people who live in apartment buildings or in residential neighborhoods, be vigilant. Do keep an eye open, look out for the residences, to look out for who's around and what they're doing. If you see any suspicious activities, if you see people who have no business being there, do contact us to report your observations and your concerns. When people report suspicious activity, we'll always make the effort necessary to send a patrol to the area and make our own observations in order to discourage the would-be thieves, and also make sure you lock your doors, keep your objects of value out of sight, and make sure that it is well lit around your residence and in your yard. And as a point of information, I just wanted to talk to you about the police officer observer program. Kodiak RCMP has reinitiated this police observer program over the last 2 years. We've had about 20 people who've participated in it. Most of them are people who are applying for a position with the RCMP, and this will help them to increase access to the community and to allow them to experience our work environment. And for us, it's a good recruitment tool. It's also a tool that was designed in order to open our doors to allow people to better understand the profession, to better understand the issues we face. It's a program that's open to students, to applicants at the RCMP, and to elected members, media, and anybody who wants to increase their knowledge on the police services. All participants can let me know that you're interested. And there is an application process. There's a form to fill out. We check your past history, if you have any criminal history. And also, if you're interested, I would be very happy to welcome you to allow you time with our patrollers. Do you have any questions? Councillor Godbout. Good afternoon. I didn't have time to talk to you about this earlier, but I know you're familiar with this information. At the meeting of the CRPA last Thursday, we had shared there was an operational plan that is being developed for the RCMP, which includes community engagement activities during June. Can you say anything about these engagement sessions, or about the invitation, or is it something that is going to be shared with the community? How are we going to communicate that? Very good question. I can tell you that we're looking at this as a team along with your team. So I'd better get the exact information before I talk to you about it to make sure I'm saying the right thing. Okay, it's just I wanted to share this with the public, basically, because it came up last Thursday. So I just wanted to let you know that there is going to be some information. Yeah, within 2 weeks. Yeah, it's not, there's no hurry, but they had talked about having these sessions in May or June. So I wanted to give people a heads up in advance. Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? If not, once again, thank you for your presence here. And as always, you're welcome to stay, but we do understand if you have to leave, because I'm sure you're busy. Which leads us to the next item, which is a presentation of the 2023 financial statements. And this presentation will be made by Lise Casey and our colleague, Stéphane Thériault, will also have things to add. Good evening. Welcome. Good evening. Yes, I'm going to give my presentation first, and then Mr. Thériault will follow with his. I'm going to present the audit results for the fiscal year 2023. First of all, I'd like to confirm that we did use the Canadian audit standards, and EY is independent of the City of Dieppe. These statements were prepared in compliance with the Canadian public sector accounting standards. These standards are different from basic accounting standards, and we expect to make an unqualified audit opinion. And we say we expect because until the report is presented, it could always change, but we expect to issue an unqualified audit report opinion, which means that the standards have been followed and respected. And once available, we will include the annual report. We will review the annual report, which will include these financial statements. These audited financial statements are consolidated. So that means they include the entities of the City of Dieppe, all funds, Expansion Dieppe, and Gestion 1604. And if there are any inter-entity transaction, they're not included in the audited financial statements. Now, if we look at the financial standards, financial statements themselves, this is the using the public sector accounting standards, the PSA standards. Now, the revenue that comes from the warrant of assessment, that's your tax, your property tax, it was 65 million in 2023 compared to 57 million the year before, a difference of 7.6 million. The sales of service, mostly water and sewerage, the revenue 15.2 million in 2023 compared to 14 million in 2022, so a $1.1 million difference. The capital assets contributed by developers. Developers, when they build subdivisions, they contribute certain capital assets to the city. The value of the contributions was 4.9 million in 2023 compared to 3.8, an increase of 1 million. And other revenues, which include contributions from other levels of government and others, for a total of 10.4 million, an increase of 253,000, which give a total revenue level for 2023 of $95.6 million compared to $85.6 million the previous year, so a difference of $10 million or 11.7% difference. Now, if we look at the expense side, once again, using the public sector accounting standards as published in your audited financial statements for 2023, protective services expenses were 17.1 million compared to 15.5 million in 2022, a difference of 1.6. Transportation services, 16.3 million compared to 16.2 million the previous year, almost the same. Recreation and cultural services, it was 13.6 million in 2023 compared to 12 million in 2022. And other expenses, 26.7 million compared to 24.32 million, for a difference of 2.4 million, for total expenses in 2023 of $73.9 million compared to 68 million the previous year, which is an increase of $5.8 million or 8.6%. Now, if we look at the total revenue minus the total of the expenses, we see that the surplus, according to the PSA standards, the public sector accounting standard, is 21.7 million compared to a surplus of 17.5 million in 2022, which is a difference of $4.1 million. Now, very quickly, I'll give you the results based on the fund accounting according to the municipal rules, because, and Mr. Thériault is going to give you more details on this, but I do confirm that the surplus in the general operating fund would be $390,874, and the surplus water and sewerage is $293,935 for a total surplus of the two funds of $684,809 for 2023. As you'll have noticed, there's a big difference between the surplus using the fund accounting method or the Canadian sector public accounting fund. So these adjustments are necessary between the two. So the adjustment is $21 million. Now, to explain this adjustment, the contribution by developers, in capital assets, 4.9 million. So this is a revenue that we add to your financial statements, but it's not a part of your fund accounting. From other government level, other grants from other governments is a revenue that's 4.1 million. The operating capital expenses, which in your audited financial statement, you add these operating capital, so it's a plus $5.4 million here. The repayment of the long-term debt, so that's not an expense in the PSA standard, so it's 9.5 million. Transfers to and from reserves, interfund transfer is not an expense in your audited financial statements. That represents 9.2 million. And interest revenue, which are presented as a revenue in your audited financial statements, but are not in your fund accounting. That was $1.5 million. And lastly, the last two, the amortization of your capital assets, that's something that you account for internally in your fund accounting, but we added, it represents $13.7 million. And their second previous year surplus, which is not in your audited financial statements, but it represents $425,000. Now, if we look at the reserve fund, at the end of December 2023, you had different reserve funds. You had your general operating reserve fund. So the balance was 3.156 million at the end of 2023, and you have a limit of 5% of your budget, and you met that. It's below the 5%. The general capital reserve here at the end of December 2023, you had $28 million, so an increase of $6 million. And in your capital reserve, there's no limit. The water and sewerage operating reserve at the end of December, you had 690,900. And once again, there's a 5% limit, and it was respected. The capital reserve, water and sewerage, at the end of December 2023 was $5.7 million. And the reserve for lands for public purposes at the end of December was 346,000, for a total of reserve funds at the end of December was $38 million compared to 30 million the previous year, an increase of $7.4 million. And this increase comes from the transfers from the general fund and 1.5 million in interest revenue, which is much higher this year than in previous years because the interest rates were much higher. Now, if we look at some financial data that I just added, the first one is the ratio of the general operating fund. We take the repayment of the interest and capital annually in your general operating fund only and divided by the total expenses of the fund. So you can see that the repayment on your bonds and your interest rate is what is the percentage that it represents in terms of actual expenses. So in 2023, it's 11.26%, 10.81% in 2022, 13.53% in 2021. There seems to be an increase in 2023, but mostly it's because you chose to repay some bonds during the year, some debt. So that would increase if you had not repaid this debenture and instead you had refinanced it, which could have been the option chosen by council, the ratio would have been 9.01%. If you had continued your payments as before, you would have reduced your ratio. I just wanted to show you the impact of having paid off the debenture completely. Now, in terms of the capital investments, just to show you a comparison year over year, in 2023, the $13.5 million, and you'll notice that's a little higher than in 2022, 2021. The city had made some big investments in 2020 and 2019, which included the Uniplex. Now, the debt level, this is the debt balance of the debt. So at December 31st, 2023, the balance of the debt was $52.3 million, so a decrease compared to 2022, and even there's been a constant decrease over the last 5 years. And lastly, my last part of the last part of my presentation, I just wanted to show you the percentage variation of the budget compared to the taxable value and the tax rate. Now you see that the tax rate, there's been a decrease, a percentage decrease for the tax rate, and also the variation, the annual variation is a lower percentage than the annual percentage in taxable value. So it was 11.1% in 2024. The value is 12 point, was the variation, annual variation was 12.7%. It will be in 2024 compared to 14.8 in 2023. And that wraps up my presentation. Do you have any questions? No, not at this point. Thank you. So let's move on then. Stéphane Thériault. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Casey.
Donc, bonsoir, membres du
Good
Conseil.
evening, councillors, colleagues, public. And so we're presenting the end of fiscal year results for 2023. Ms. Casey just mentioned it, and I will mention it again. There were two different ways of presenting the end of year data, either using our method, which is our work tool, which is what we call the fund accounting method, which is it's what we have in the bank. It's our bank account. It's the money that comes in, the money goes out, and we look to see what we did compared to the budget that had been adopted, and did we meet our objectives? So that's our work tool. When every 3 months we present the situation where we're at. And then there are also the audited financial statements that use other rules, which is closer to a business. For example, there's amortization, it's the monetary as well as non-monetary values of things. So it makes a difference between the two. And at the end of my presentation, we'll go through a little exercise in my last two, actually. I'll give you a demonstration of what it would mean for a family with a $100,000 budget with expenses of $100,000, what it would mean for them if they were only using the public sector accounting method, how it would look. So right now, what I'm going to do, first of all, is to show our surplus. In other words, the general operating fund, which was 390,391 for 2023, as well as the water and sewerage operating fund surplus, which was $294,000. First of all, our budget was 71,000. Was the province asks us to balance our budgets at zero. So there is this surplus of 391,000. So there's surplus of 1.4 million and a deficit in the debt of the expense side of almost 1 million. So that gives 391,000. Here I'm giving you a little more details on this 391. First of all, you can see the revenue from building permits. We had a budget of $600,000, but our actual was almost $1.4 million, $1.46 million. So building permits last year were worth $1.8 million, 180,000 million compared to the previous year. That was $120 million. It gave us a lot more revenue than planned. So it's revenue that it's hard to predict. Interest rates went up. How is that? We didn't know if that meant that building rates would go down. We didn't know. But in 2022, in 2023, we had $860,000 surplus. Secondly, we have interest and other revenues. As Ms. Casey just explained to us, the interest rates went up a lot in 2023 compared to 2022. So we had an interest of 1.5% in 2022, but it was closer to 5% in 2023, which gave us $410,000 surplus. the revenues from the arena and the aquatic center went up as well. Now, in 2022, we prepare our budget for 2023. We're just coming out of COVID, and we had decreases in the use of the arenas and the aquatic center. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if we were out of the, I don't remember how to call it anymore, the pandemic. But finally, we had budgeted $1.8 million revenue, and our actuals were 2.1 million. So the use was almost 100%. So a surplus of $370,000. The fourth revenue was a grant for the Park Drive. We're talking about the Rotary Park in Saint Anselme. So we had to redo the road. Now, once it was finished in December, approximately, we heard that there might be funding available for that type of construction, especially for the trail that follows the road, the drive. And so we received $128,000. So it's a surplus because we hadn't budgeted it. And so it was nice. It was great that we applied for the program. And then there were expensive. There were on the expense side, we had surpluses. So like every year, when as you can see, this is mostly when there are vacant positions, or if there are new positions that have been accepted during the year, or people who left, and by the time they're replaced, it causes a surplus, or also sick leave, because if somebody is off on sick leave, short-term or long-term, that causes a surplus. This is $1.2 million there. And then now public transit, and there's expenses and there's revenues, and it's a little confusing, but let me explain. We had budgeted $1.3 million to pay the expense of public transit, but within that expense, there are also revenues that people pay to take the bus. So last year we had $1.6 million in expenses, but $300,000 in revenue, which gave a $1.3 million budget. But in the end, we had a lot more ridership. We went from $300,000 that we thought we would get as revenue to $480,000. So that gives us a $180,000 surplus. So in total, it's $3.141 million surplus for revenues and expenses. And how did we get the 391 from this? Well, that's because of the board.
This is where we focused our efforts. It shows us that the debt went down by $10 million. So it went from 62 million to 52 million. And first of all, the refinancing of loans. So we paid in cash. So we're talking about a loan that happened in 2008 for the aquatic center. It was an amount of $3 million. We were going to pay it back over 25 years, but it was refinanced after 15 years. So we're in 2023, we have the option to refinance it, to reborrow those monies again, or to pay it off. And that's what we did for this. So for $1.7 million. Secondly, was a loan from 2022, rather than borrowing, because we were going to borrow this year for that one. We were talking about the synthetic surface that we did last year at a cost of, I think it was $3.6 million. But from that $3.6 million, there was a loan which was about some $500,000 or $490,000. So instead of getting the loan this year, we took the surplus and we paid it off as well. So we once again reduced the debt. And thirdly, it was a loan for this year. So work happened this year. Well, I'm in 2023, I say this year, but that's the year I mean. So for 2023, this was work that was completed with regard to the pickleball courts. We had a loan that we could have gotten, and we said, no, we'll pay it off completely. And the same thing with the designated, so Champlain, which we redid in 2023, once again there, we had an anticipated loan of $650,000, but we reduced that one by $350,000 to bring it down to $540,000. So both gave us the $540,000 that we paid off completely. So these aren't loans that are on anymore. And there are various other accounts, the operating budget, all kinds of accounts involved there. So if you put them all together and add them up, it gives us a small deficit of $26,000, just to indicate to you that the balance of operational costs came out about equal. So that's at 391,000. Let me do the same thing for water and sewage. I don't know if there are any questions right away before I go on to water and sewage. Any questions by council members? No? All good? Okay. With regard to water and sewage, we had a budget of $14.7 million, which balanced out to zero. The actual costs and the surplus, we can see a surplus of $294,000. So with regard to revenues, it was a surplus of $1.0 million, and then expenditures, which gives us the 294,000. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you the facts of this budget. Firstly, you can see the fixed rate income. I'm talking about income where it's a residential rate. So residences in Dieppe have water meters, so everyone pays the same price for water, which is $948 per unit. I had 8.2 million units. That was the budget. Finally, we had 9 million units at the end of the year. So a surplus of 250,000 at $940 gives us that $250,000 in surplus. So the city is getting bigger than what I had budgeted for. The same with regard to the variable rate. This one are those who also have water meters, ECE, so industrial, commercial, and industrial, among others. Here I had a budget of $3.3 million of revenues for equivalent units of 3,500 units. Oops. Give me a second. And finally, the nice surprise is that increase by a great deal. We're talking about apartment buildings and row houses, or townhouses. So these kinds of residences have water meters, and they really increase in number, use much more water than anticipated. And we're talking about a $660,000, which is the equivalent of almost 700 more units. So 700 with variable rates and another 250,000 with the fixed rate. So really 1,000 units more than I had anticipated and had budgeted for. I'm sorry, I had anticipated 1,200 and we had 1,300 units. So with the surplus, one last thing is the interest. As we saw earlier, the interest, the 360,000 included other interest on rates when people pay late. So we had budgeted a certain amount there. And then we have rental rates for the water tower, where there are antennas set up there. We could get water in the future. So we have lands that had done some planting. So we have a surplus of the wood that we're cutting. It's all in that budget, but really put that up were the interest rates on our investments. We were expecting 30 to 40,000, and finally we had an income of some 110,000 because interest rates were at 5%, which explains the 110,000 surplus. So the total of surplus is $1 million. And once again, we refinanced the loan that we paid back. So these loans were made in 2008 for water services, Champlain Street, Lakeburn, Corvette. So in that neighborhood, and those was Dieppe Boulevard, which we fixed up with Harrisville. So another water was coming from Moncton to Dieppe. So we invested in those in that infrastructure, and we paid it back with the interest rates that you see today. And the other accounts, as earlier, the operation accounts balanced out. So with a surplus of 40,000, which gives us an end of year surplus of $294,000, which shows us how we did the fund accounting. Do you have any questions? Questions by council members? Councillor Le Boutillier. Thank you, Your Worship. It's basically because I had some questions about the financial statements, but I just wanted to better understand. When the notes, when we talk about debentures, of a debenture, you say in the notes 3.9 at 4.85. How does that work, this whole debenture system? When does it go from the 3.95 to 4 point something? When we get a debenture from the government, after it could be 10, 15, 20, 25 years, every year has a different interest rate attached to it. So what happens is that the payment every year is practically the same, but a portion is interest, a portion is capital, so the portion interest varies from year to year. The capital varies from year to year, and the interest rate varies, as you said a moment ago, from 4.25. It's always been the case ever since I've been here. So it's a combined method. It's a kind of a combined method. There's a different interest rate every year, and the same thing then happens when it comes to some investments or interest investments. For example, no, our term deposits change from year to year. Yes, we have term deposits, and of course, depending on the time that it was made, the interest rate would vary. Thank you. Not at all. I don't see anyone else, so let's continue on. So I'm going to give you a little exercise, pretending there's a family in Dieppe that has a budget of $100,000, and I'll bring back every point that made a difference where we have a surplus of $21.7 million with regard to the public sector accounting standards. And so there were many criteria compared to fund accounting. So to come back to these criteria, I want to come back to it in a way that will allow us to understand things a little bit better. So let's first of all set a budget. The family income is $100,000, and we compare this with the actual results, and then we'll pretend that they have to present the results according to public sector accounting standards. Let's do this for a bit of fun. So let's say our family, they have, of the $100,000 they have as income, their first expenditure are basic amounts. So living expenses, food, clothing, restaurants, activities. So they provided $50,000 of the $100,000, but finally it costs them $47,000 in 2023. So you can see there's a $3,000 surplus right there. They have a mortgage to pay, so $20,000 per year, but you can see that a portion of interest and a portion on the capital amount. Then there's a car purchase in the amount of $25,000. There was no loan. They paid it in cash. And so in the future, they want to buy a boat. They don't have the cash, but they're going to put money aside. So they're going to put $5,000 to purchase this boat. Now, a new subsidy came out from the government so they can redo their roof. This applies to them. They were able to redo their roof, costing $25,000 with the money received from the government. Unfortunately, one of their parents passed away, and they received a cottage to the value of $150,000 as an inheritance, and they have a house that they bought in 2009 for $250,000, and their mortgage is spread out over 25 years. This is simply to show you that there is a depreciation over time. So there's 250,000 over 25 years, so about $10,000 per year over the course of 25 years. This is my last slide. So I'm going to take 5-10 minutes to explain all this to you. So if you look on the blue side, never mind the red side on the right-hand side, but just look at the blue side, you can see the expenditures of $100,000 and the expenses, the $50,000 to live, the mortgage, $25,000 for the car, transfer to a savings account. The expenditure for the roof was a sort of an in and out. So that canceled it out. They came down to a budget of 0. So they balanced their budget. But then what happened? According to this same accounting method, so what is the money coming in and what is the money going out? So they had an income of $100,000. Their basic expenses were a little lower. They saved $3,000 there. They paid $20,000 toward their mortgage, $25,000 for the car, the transfer to a savings account, because here you're looking at the checking account, not the savings account. So this is the difference between the reserve fund and an operating fund. So a checking account versus a savings account, the roof, etc. So there's a surplus of $3,000. That's the equivalent for us when we talk about the operating budget, that $390,000 versus the water and sewage, which was $310,000. So this is their checking account, which had a surplus of $3,000. What do they do with that $3,000? Well, they can take it and say, okay, next year we'll start with $103,000. So they carried forward the surplus to the following year. This is what we do with our surpluses. We carry them forward to subsequent years. Now, let's go to the right. We're going to do this according to public sector accounting standards. First of all, the salary is the same. The expenses are the same, $100,000 and $47,000 respectively. But now things get complicated. The mortgage of $20,000 in reality for public sector accounting has interest of $12,000. So we recognize that the interest is an expense, but we don't recognize the other $8,000 as an expenditure because it brought the debt down. So we recognize the $12,000, but not the $8,000. So we increase our surplus by $8,000. Secondly, this comes to what we do in our case, where we have paid for $10 million in capital on our loans. So the expenditure of the purchase of a car, they paid cash, $25,000. So for public setting account, they have an asset which is not an expenditure. So their asset, they had $100,000, went down to 75, but the other asset has been created at $25,000, and so it has no impact on the income. But as we do when we pay something in cash, we have management of our assets. We put money in our budget either to build or to buy assets. Now, the $5,000 for a savings account is not recognized by public sector accounting because really they've just switched their money from a checking account to a savings account, like we do when we put money in the reserve. The roof, $25,000. Once again, it's like the car. It's money that has been put toward assets, so it doesn't count as an expense. But the income from the government, they got from the government to pay for the roof, well, now we recognize that, $25,000. But it was an in and out. You got the money, you spent it. No impact on your money, no impact on your checking account. But according to public sector accounting standards, we recognize that it's an income, like when we receive subsidies or grants from the government toward our assets. For example, the tax on gas, which is $1.9 million, or formerly it was called the gas tax. Now it's the community funding, what the new name for it, but it's the same principle. It's the money that we get for our assets that we have to account for 100% as if it were an income under the public sector accounting standards. The last two, so the depreciation, I talked to you about a depreciation of $250,000 home. You've repaired the roof for $25,000, which is guaranteed for 10 years. So once again, you have $2,500 per year. So now have a depreciation of $12,500. But when you do the fund accounting, no money came in or out, so I don't recognize it. But on the other hand, in this public sector, yes, it's a depreciation expense. And the car should have been depreciated and the cottage as well, but I didn't go there. And then lastly, they received a cottage worth $100,000 by way of inheritance. In the public sector accounting, we have to recognize it. It's an income. But in the fund accounting, there was no money changing hands, so we didn't recognize it. It's like we do with all the developments, funding that we receive from developers. And so they do this, and these roads are given back to the municipality. So there was no transfer of money, but we increase our assets, and so we have to increase something else. We have to do the accounting, and the income of the revenue has increased. So last year was a 4-point-something million in contributions by developers. So I wanted to bring you closer to understanding what the differences are between public sector accounting standards and fund accounting. So you can see that at the end of the year, the family, and this is what is left in their accounts, so the surpluses that we have just shown you of $390,000 and $310,000 versus the family, which has healthy management. The family is in good, healthy financial shape. And this is what the $21.7 million or 22, I can't remember the exact number now, shows that we are doing too. We are in very good financial health. So compared to a business, so from that point of view, we're really giving you the pulse of what's happening. So that's what I wanted to present to you this evening. Thank you so much. Question by council members. Councillor Le Boutillier, to begin. Thank you. We saw in the presentation that we have reserves some $38 million. We expect what in the future are we going to be looking at stopping the growth on that? How is it going to work? Well, what I could tell you is that I'm going to be meeting you at the third Monday meeting in May. I'll be giving you our public accounting sector. I'm sorry, I'll be doing the fund accounting and where we are in our budget. And so maybe I could also explain the reserves at that time, because it seems to be a big number, but in reality, it's divided into 3 or 4 amounts. So on the one hand, you have asset management. This is the money we set aside for eventually to spend it on assets that need to be replaced. We're talking about a 13 million. I'm going by what I think it is because I don't have the paper in front of me. But we think that in 2022 we had a lot of work done, and that was money from the operating capital that paid for it. And finally, the work wasn't done. For example, here at the corner of Acadie and Champlain, we took that money and we put it in a reserve. In the same way that the market that was supposed to be done, we put $1 million aside, that hasn't been spent, and we're putting it in the reserve. So all the money from the 38 million have already been predetermined, and there's a list of all the things it represents. Out of the 38 million, we have maybe $1 million, which is not committed. So it's there, and it's there in case things need to be done, work needs to be undertaken. But most of the 38 million has already been committed. So it would be good for me to do a presentation on the reserve funds that I could do the same at the same time as I do the consolidated financial statements. Thank you. Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. I've always said that you would be a great teacher. I wonder, in this little booklet that we have here, Is this available on the website? Yes, it will be? Okay, great. Because it explains things very well, and I'll share it. Thank you. Thank you for the explanations.
Merci.
Thank you.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
Anyone else?
Non? Alors,
Hearing none,
encore une fois pour
thank you once again
l'explication
for this explanation.
ceux-là comme moi,
For those of us like me who aren't very well versed in these types of information, I rely on you the way I rely on my spouse at home with regard to everything that's financially related. So where things go, contrary to others around the table who are very well versed in some of these matters. That's why I've always worked in human resources and not in accounting. Easier for me. Thank you. Thank you. Item 8, question by members of the public, from the many members of the public who are here. No questions? Let's now go on to the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting, April 8th. Who would like to move? Moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Genet on the question. Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Against, nay. The resolution is carried as presented. This brings us to item 10. Motions, memorandums, and nominations. Item in 10.1 administration. 10.1.1 adoption of policy A28 2024 on business expenses employees. This brings us to 10.2.1. You went a little quickly, Your Worship. We have to vote 10.1.1, the adoption of the policy A28. Oh, pardon me. 10.1.1. Adoption of policy A28. Yes, sorry. Well, the CEO will authorize business expenses for travel. There's a small change that was made. You can see it on pages 64 and 65 of your package. So you can authorize without having get to contact the mayor about it. Yes, once again, I'm being skipped over. To read the resolution, Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. That Council repeal policy A28, A-28, 2023, entitled Business Expenses Employees, and adopt the new policy A28, 2024, entitled Business Expense Employees. I so move, Your Worship. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Thibodeau on the question. On the question, Councillor Godbout. Thank you, Your Worship. Given the amendment, do we have in our procedures a notice which is a referral to the mayor because it's being delegated? I understand it, but is the mayor made aware of trips externally? Not the way it's drafted. Do we have that provision for any extraordinary things in other cases, or so extraordinary that we have to advise the mayor about it? The idea here is we're trying to avoid that. We don't want any delays in preparing things, and we don't want to have to wait if the mayor isn't available, that the CAO can do it. But when you authorize this travel, and we can incorporate it in our procedures, or should we put it within this? But it's the only thing I think that I would have changed to be made aware of travel outside or away. They would have an opportunity to do it there or object to it then and not right before the trip. This change was also done because of the restructuring of assistant CAOs. It goes to them first, and then they were doing it and sent to the CAO. So you had two pairs of eyes? Okay. That answers your question? Yes, I think in our procedures, we should be cautious. I don't know if it needs to be in the policy, but I think we should advise the mayor when you're making trips like that outside, so that be away, and maybe not for your approval, but simply for your information. It's noted. We'll discuss it internally. Thank you. Councillor Genet. Thank you, Your Worship. I would echo Councillor Godbout's words. I think that the mayor should be informed every time this is authorized. But by way of information, are there any other cities of our size do this the same way? I have no answer for that. We'd have to make inquiries. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Alors, pour le vote maintenant, ceux qui sont en faveur de la
Ready for the vote. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
ceux qui sont contre,
Opposed,
non.
nay.
La résolution est adoptée.
It's carried as presented,
Et on va certainement prendre en considération.
and we will
C'est noté.
take those comments in consideration.
Maintenant, au 10.2,
10.2,
l'adoption des états
the
financiers.
adoption of the financial statements.
2.1.
10.2.1. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Thibodeau.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Que le Conseil
That Council adopt the financial statements of the City of Dieppe for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2023, as presented by the firm Ernst & Young. And I so move it. It's been moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Turgeon-Roy on the question. Councillor Godbout. Thank you. Just a couple of details, please. When we look at the note, we talk about land that is assessed at the lesser of the market value or the cost. On the issue of market value, because of the changes, major changes we've seen in the value, the market value of land and in the market in general, at what point should we reconsider how we consider this market value, how we assess it? So the accounting standards stipulate that it's the purchase price. And if there's never a re-evaluation upwards, just if there's a lower value, then it's expensed on the financial statement at the lower value. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. It's carried as presented. 10.3.1, a service level agreement with Guardian IMS. Yes, and Your Worship, we recommend that you authorize an agreement with QIT Canada Inc. in order to implement an all-in-one management and disaster management service on a cell phone basis. And it's the same system used in Moncton and Riverview, so it'll allow us to standardize in the whole area. You can ask any questions to Mr. Cormier, who is here with us this evening, if you like. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Jeannin. Thank you. That Council authorize the municipal signing officers to sign the service level agreement with QIT Canada Inc. to provide access to Guardian IMS software for the management of municipal emergency measures. And I so move it. It's been moved by Councillor Jeannin, seconded by Councillor Le Boutier on the question. Councillor Godbout. Thank you. In this agreement, if I look at page 125 of our package, under the heading costs, it says the costs will be assessed based on the 2021 census. Are the amounts presented here, have they considered the 2021 census figures? Did they use those in 2021? The costs on page 125 are the costs included in the contract proposed this evening. There will be an assessment done in 2026 to see how the population numbers have changed. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. It's adopted as presented. 10.4, engineering. 10.4.1, a tender award. Mr. Simard. Thank you, Will. The title says it all. It's a tender award for pedestrian crossing lights at Dieppe and Boulevard and Caleb Street. So it's to install a pedestrian crossing lights at the cost of $127,600 plus HST, and that it would be awarded to Modern Constructions, and that the X services be authorized to undertake engineering services at a cost of $45,000, and further authorize that this be defrayed by the account number here. Thank you. To read the resolution, Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you. That Council award the tender for the project entitled New Pedestrian Crossing Lights, Dieppe Boulevard and Caleb Street, project to the lowest bidder, Modern Construction 1983 Limited, at the cost of $127,600 plus HST, and authorize EXP Services to undertake engineering services relating to said project at the cost of $45,000 plus HST, and further authorize that these expenditures be defrayed from account number 3-3-35-58-7681, General Capital Budget, Pedestrian Crossing, Dieppe Boulevard. And I so move it with pleasure. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Jeannin on the question. Councillor Godbout. Thank you. On page 136 of our package, it says that the cost estimated was under $100,000. And we see an increase here. We regularly see an increase of the cost that give us amounts that are much higher than planned. In our 2024 budget, when should we start worrying that there's going to be a problem before the end of the year with all of these increased costs? I will refer the question to our venerable accountant, Mr. Thériault. You're going to see in the next points, you'll probably get an answer to your question, because we've had to get money that hadn't been identified for capital projects. This is a reality that we are experiencing. And we've been able to adapt to a certain point, but when we're talking about the preparation of the 2025 budget, we're going to have to increase the costs, or at least look at what we had forecasted, because there have been some big increases, yes, in fact. Indeed. Thank you, Councillor Le Boutier. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. As a question of information, I just wanted a clarification. This intersection, that's that little path in front of the Golf Street, right up at the top of the hill. It's pretty dangerous there. My next question, the road that had been fixed, as if I remember correctly, we had fixed that, but it didn't belong to the city, right? That section from Golf Road to Dieppe Boulevard, if I remember correctly. And we had done it because because it was a question of public safety. But my question is, now, if we look forward in time, is that crossing light going to remain there in future as an investment? Yeah, no, this is just a pedestrian crossing light. It's not to control the intersection. It would be like where you see on Louis Street and Amiro. So somebody has to go press the button to activate the crossing lights. There was a transfer 2 years ago before we realigned and rebuilt the street. The access to the Golf Street was not synchronized with Caleb Street, so we had to upgrade it. Now we're going to put crossing lights now for the pedestrian crossing lights. But I don't know if I'm answering your question. Oh, well, I just wanted to make sure that the investment that we had made, I'm sure you've looked at this, but the asking it is answering it, but probably it's looking towards the future that this is going to remain there. Well, yeah, and this is only pedestrian crossing between Lake Byrne and Melanson. So that's a long section, and because of the field of vision, that is the appropriate place to put it. Thank you. If there are no other questions, then all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. It is adopted as presented. 10.4.2, a tender award for the roundabout at the intersection of La France and Gauvin streets. Yes, this is part of the Thomas Street realignment project. So we recommend that it be go to the lowest bidder, Dexter Construction, and EXP Services to undertake the engineering services for a final cost of $5,553,000. Now, Gauvin Street will be repaved. There will be the rebuilding of a new part of Thomas Street. You could see the map at page 544 of your package. There's also the future road on page 150. But as Mr. Thériault mentioned earlier, the costs are higher than we had expected, and there's a budget transfer of $630,000 will be necessary to pay for this construction work. Thank you. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. That Council award the tender for the project entitled Roundabout La France Gauvin intersection to the lowest bidder, Dexter Construction Company Limited, at the cost of $4,911,131 plus HST. Authorize EXP Services to undertake the engineering service relating to said project at the cost of $195,000 plus HST, and further authorize that these expenditures be defrayed from account number 3-3-35-7667, General Capital Budget, Thomas Street Realignment, and account number 4-3-90-58-7667, Water and Sewer Capital Budget, Thomas Street Realignment. That Council authorize a budget transfer in the amount of $630,000 from the account number 1-2-85-9079-5945, General Operating Budget, transfer to Capital Reserve Fund, to account number 3-3-35-58-7667, General Capital Budget, Thomas Street Realignment. And I so move it, Your Worship. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Le Boutier on the question. Councillor Godbout. Well, I think that the use of roundabouts is very important because traffic numbers are going up. I'd like to understand, though, before we make this major investment, I was trying to understand when there's a traffic jam in this kind of traffic mechanism? How does it work and how quickly does it dissipate? For example, to go from La France to Champlain, you can just imagine a traffic jam because people are going into the traffic circle, but you're 250 meters from a traffic light. So how did you see and anticipate all of this, and why is it still a good investment? Mr. Cormier, good question, technical question. There has been changes in that sector. There is a left turn lane on La France, and so you don't have, there are a number of lanes, but if we see that there is queuing, there's queuing that rise right up to the intersection into the roundabout. Well, of course, they're not going to move, but then we'd probably have to change the way the traffic lights work at Champlain. Perhaps, allow a longer time for the left turns or something like that. But we could modify the traffic lights accordingly if that happens. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Le Boutier. Thank you. 2 questions. When are we expecting the construction, the work? Do we have any more details on this? And my second question, on Thomas Street, when you first get there, Thomas and Gauvin Streets, where you have the three lanes, is it going to remain as 3 lanes? And with this roundabout, there's going to be a new loop. Is it going to remain a three lanes? Because in the evening, a lot of cars are going to go that way. I'm just wondering how that's going to work, like similar to Councillor Godbout's question. Well, the construction is going to begin just after the long weekend, May 21st, I believe. It's supposed to be finished by October, but the contract does allow 100 days, construction days. There could be unexpected events, bad weather that can push it back. Something to note as well for the timing, and we'll have to give notices, but at that intersection, because there's going to be some major work, they're only going to close the intersection once schools close. They're expecting to close the intersection from June 24th to early September, I believe. This is the first phase of the project. This year we're going to build the roundabout, but the complete realignment of Thomas Street will be in the next few years. For now, it's in the 2027. It's planned for 2027, according to our budget currently. But once Thomas has been realigned at Gauvin and the old section of Thomas Street, we will be able to remove the stop signs from Gauvin. Typically, when you have a 3-way stop, you need a certain amount of traffic that is balanced. If it's unbalanced at that kind of intersection, it doesn't work anymore. It can even become dangerous because after a while, people just go through anyhow without stopping. So in the future, we're going to remove the stop on Gauvin, so it'll go directly from Pascal right up to the roundabout without any stops. I think there were, I don't know if I answered the 3 different parts of your question. Yes, so you'll force people to use the roundabout. Well, Thomas is going to be realigned directly towards the roundabout. So to get to the existing intersection between Thomas and Gauvin, you'd have to turn right, actually. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? All those in favor of this resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. It's carried as presented. 14.4 10.4.3. My pencil is moving ahead of me here. 10.4.3, assigning authority for highway usage and occupancy permit. 10.4.3, indeed. Who would like to read the resolution? Would you like me to explain? A very brief explanation. We have a development project in the sector of l'Aviation Street. And in order to complete phase 2 of this project, we're going to build a water main between Champagne and Aviation Streets, and then and put in a pumping station. One of the sections of this has to go under the right of way of Highway 2, and we need authorization from the DOT, and we received it recently, and we also have to give a guarantee of $250,000 for a 3-year period. So security deposit. So we're just asking for authorization of this agreement with the province and the authorization to deposit $250,000 with the DTI. And you can have more details on page 158 of your package. Thank you. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. That Council authorize the signature of the agreement with the province of New Brunswick for a highway usage permit in regards to the expansion of the Dieppe Industrial Park, Phase 2B, and the water system looping, and that Council authorize a cash security deposit in the amount of $250,000 to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. And I so move it. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Jeannet on the question. If none, Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering about the language of this agreement. The working language of Dieppe is French. This province is the only one that is officially bilingual, and we accept this. I just don't agree with it. I'm going to vote against this resolution because of that. Thank you. Somebody would like to second the resolution? Madame Jeannet has already seconded. Councillor Deboutier on the question. Would anybody else have a question or comment? Well, I agree. I don't know if there was an explanation given by the province as to why we received this document in English only. If I look at it, the correspondence, it's all in French, but the documents attached are in English only. Oh, no, even the correspondence is in English. Mr. Cormier. Well, we had the same reflex, but the request was made by our consultants in English. Oh, well, probably, yeah. Now, we asked them to ask for the permit, so maybe they saw that the person in charge of the province was an Anglophone, but we were surprised to see that it was in English only. We were surprised to see that the permit arrived without any feedback in advance. Well, in that case, perhaps it's up to the city. When we hire a contractor, a consultant, it should be clear that the request on behalf of the city should be made in French. When they're acting on behalf of the city, they have to make these requests in French. So at least it's a little less insulting. At least now I understand. You answer in the language in which you receive the request. Okay, that's a little less insulting. At least thank you for that detail, because at last it allowed me to vote in favor of the resolution. But I think this is something we should do. We should review our internal contracts when we hire consultants or contractors. When they make a request on our behalf, it should be made in French, and we should get the answers in French. Yeah. So we'll see. We will send a letter. I'm sure we will send a letter of complaint to the group, be it the province or the consultant, and we will complain because of this. And yeah, we'll send a letter to Fredericton for the same reason. That said, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. I would like to speak again. Sorry, thank you, Councillor Thibodeau. Well, after hearing the explanations from Mr. Cormier, I will vote in favor of the resolution. But I hope this will be rectified in future because it's not the first time that I've made this comment and nothing changes. Thank you for pointing that out. All those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. It's carried as presented. At 10.4.4, tender award for the industrial park expansion, phase 2B. Yeah, it's the same development project following the awarding of the financing because of a bilateral Canada-New-Brunswick agreement, the Canada Infrastructure Program. There is now, we're recommending that we award the contract to Birch Hill Construction at a cost of $9,386,796 plus HST and Englobe Corp to undertake the engineering services for $350,000 and to further authorize these expenditures be defrayed by the accounts as indicated here. The First Nations have been consulted and the consultation is considered to be complete by the federal government, and similarly as in other files, because of the increase of the costs of the work since 2022, because the evaluation had been made in 2022, it is necessary to transfer $770,000. Thank you. Who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Leboutier. Thank you, Your Worship. That Councillor award the tender for the project entitled Dieppe Business Park Expansion, Phase 2B and Water System Looping to the lowest bidder, Birch Hill Construction Limited, at the cost of $9,386,796 plus HST, authorize Englobe Corp to undertake engineering services relating to said project at the cost of $350,000 plus HST, and further authorize these expenditures be defrayed from account number 3-3-35-58-7665, General Capital Budget, Expansion, Industrial Park, Aviation, Phase 2B, and account number 4-3-90-58-7666, Water and Sewer Capital Budget, Expansion, Industrial Park, Aviation, Phase 2B. That Council authorize a budget transfer in the amount of $770,000 from account number 1-2-85-79-5945, General Operating Budget, transferred to General Capital Reserve Fund, to account number 3-3-35-58-7665, General Capital Budget, Expansion, Industrial Park, Aviation, Phase 2B, and I so move. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thibodeau on the question. Councillor Godbout. Well, I'd like to come back to the point we made earlier when we look at the amounts. So I understand that they're high, and I'm going to vote in favor of the resolution. But when I asked the question earlier, if we're going to have to look at our 2024 budget and how are we going to address the cost, and the answer was we're going to have to look at next year's budget probably to see if we put more money towards these projects. Well, I think this year we're going to have to decide when, at which point this is going to compromise our projects for this year and our schedule of projects. We have to balance it all out at some point. And where do we put the funding? And because there's also a pressure on the tax rate that we impose. So I'd like to come back to this because I think we have to look at our ambitions this year because we have this kind of amount for all of our projects at one point. Perhaps we're going to need comments. I'd be interested to hear the comments and the thoughts of staff on this to see if we should review our projects scheduled for this year, our infrastructure projects for this year or next year. And I think you've already mentioned it, Mr. Theriault. It's a good suggestion to look at the amounts we have in the reserve for which project, and is it still relevant, and should we reallocate it differently? I think this is a good thing to think about now because of the large amounts that we're seeing between what we had forecast reasonably. We had reasonably predicted certain cost levels, and everything is changing dramatically around us. So I think we should think about it, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this within the next few weeks. Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? If not, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Carried as presented. And operations then for 10.5.1, 10.5.1, yes, the purchase of a generator for the Uniplex. Yes, this is simple. It's just the purchase of a generator from Summers Generator System at the cost of $422,014 plus HST. It's a diesel generator, 1,000 kilowatts that can generate electricity for the whole Uniplex. And we have an application for 40% of the grant that is going to be sent on this purchase. So it's been moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Turgeon-Roy.
Moi. J'allais plus vite que le violon. Merci, Monsieur
Sorry,
Thibodeau.
I was ahead of the music. Thank you, Worship. That Council award the tender for the purchase of a generator and automatic transfer switch to Summers Generator Systems Limited at the cost of $422,014 plus HST, pursuant to its proposal dated April 4, 2024, and authorize this expenditure be defrayed from account number 3-3-20-12-7903, General Capital Budget, Equipment Purchase, CLCLD. I so move, Your Worship. Moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Janin. On the question, there being none. Oh, Councillor Godbout, sorry. Thank you. Just a point for clarification. Is the resolution to approve the purchase is subject to getting the grant? And the reason I'm asking is because often, if you can finance it yourself, then you don't need a grant. Do you understand? So if the resolution says we go ahead and make the purchase and we communicate our resolution, maybe it won't work. So is a resolution subject that we get to the grant? So if we make the request, then we're approving 60% of the cost of the purchase, but the resolution reads as if we're approving 100% of the cost of the purchase. And so I'm just asking for clarification for this resolution. Good evening. Finally, yes, we are approving the expenditure. And in this case, we had an indication that this purchase qualified because one of the important components of this purchase was with regard to emergency measures. So it qualifies. We don't have the answer as to whether we're getting the 40%, but with tonight's resolution, it allows us to make the application for the grant. So I understand what you're saying, and this is where we're at. We could not make the application before, according to this program. But the resolution could read, subject to approval of the grant, we authorize the purchase. The budget was prepared in this way. So the purchase for $500,000. Well, I'm not sure that I correctly understood what you're asking. What I heard you're asking is that approval of council for the total expenditure. You have the intention of submitting the application for the grant. If you don't get the application, if you don't get the grant, you are authorized to make the purchase. Is that what I understood? That's right. When stated that way, you're right. Well, that's what we're saying. So I move an amendment to the resolution that it be subject to the approval of the grant. Unless you're telling me, otherwise it's a change to the budget and we're giving it. What do you need in order to be able to make the application for the grant? We need to authorize the purchase of the generator. So if we say it's subject to obtaining approval, does this allow you to apply for the grant? We have not asked that question. We will ask. We'll do it anyway, but I don't have the answer. If we approve under condition, I don't know if we qualify. And I imagine, yes, and we have applied to this program for other projects. Well, let me ask the question differently. If we approve the resolution tonight, will you initiate the purchase of the item without getting an answer back whether you have the grant or not? The application for the grant is going to be done in the coming days, but without getting that, are you purchasing it? Are you ordering it before you get the answer for the grant? We don't offer the contract. We can inform the tenderer that we are getting a certain amount of financing. Are we legally undertaking to make this purchase before we get the grant? Yes, then I would say yes. Having said this, if you allow, you have to be careful with the awards. The conditions can't be changed willy-nilly. Well, is this a tender? Is the purchase going to be made whether we get this grant or not? That's the question. I would say yes, but I understand the councillor's question, and I understand the statement that the treasurer says, yes, the budget was made like this, the 400,000 minus the $20,000 grant. But we'll comply with the decision of council. As I said, it's a matter of whether we not award the contract. Well, we can put it in abeyance until we get the answer back from applying for the grant. We can do that too. I don't know, Mr. Simon, if you can do it that way. Well, if there's a doubt, maybe we can table this. Is there any urgency? Well, dates for delivery have been submitted and guaranteed. If we come back in 2 weeks, that you have to go ask. We'll tell everyone to come back in 2 weeks, and then we'll have to change things at that point. Is the situation going to be any different in 2 weeks? I don't think so. No, we won't have any more information in 2 weeks' time. Look, I was asking the question because, I live in a world of grants and subsidies. You have to do the purchase yourself. Sometimes you don't qualify. Oh, considering that we're eligible for a grant, that we do it. I don't know if you can say it this way, considering that we're eligible, even though it hasn't been approved. As I said earlier, you can't add conditions to a tender when initially they weren't there. You can't amend a tender when the conditions were not there in the, when the tender was. No, we're not changing the tender. We're changing whether we award it. So we receive the tenders. We're not obliged to make the purchase because we did a tender. Well, perhaps those who had they seen that condition, that could change the market. They might have changed their tender if it had been written that way. If it's in the budget, I recommend that you proceed and we make an attempt for the grant. It's with RDC, and it also includes, we can ask for the installation. So we're not asking only for the 422,000. We're going to be asking a little under 500,000 because you can't ask for more than 500,000 in that program. So it'll be 75,000 and that will qualify us to get a 40% grant. Look, have we had a discussion with the RDC? A favorable one? Yes, all indications are favorable, except that I couldn't make the application. It's the chicken or the egg. Look, I'll go along with it this evening for risk management purposes, but maybe we could note how we can present this to council in the future so we don't find ourselves in this situation. Mr. Cormier, you had a comment? Yes, thank you. I understand your question, but also to support the request, it would be good for the city to a place to lodge people in a situation of emergency. That's why I recommend the purchase. So the request for the application for a grant has been sent to us. So I can't believe that we won't qualify. It's specifically for emergency measures. And so it would be an advantage for the municipality. You're confident in getting the request for the grant? Yes. Thank you, Councillor Chenet. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question of information to come back to the need to purchase this generator. I'm thinking of the city. We have lots of generators already. What is different with this one compared to the generators we have? Are they not mobile? Can't they be brought to the Uniplex already? This one will be able to provide 100% of the electricity required to power the Uniplex. The maximum threshold that we attain is 820 kilowatts, and that's why we're buying 1,000 kilowatt. We don't have a 1,000 kilowatt generator in our inventory. So the mobile one, I think, has 400 or 600 kilowatts, but would not be able to provide enough to power the Uniplex. And then we have to install, what was it called? The automatic transfer switch. So there's a difference there, and there's a cost attached to that item. So this allows us to keep the building open 100% of the time and to house emergency measures, because the main reason is for emergency measures. But the fact remains that if the electricity was out for a day or two, operations could continue, and maybe we wouldn't need emergency measures. So we have showers there. We could house people. There are other elements of the emergency measures plan that could come into play if we are able to operate 100% of the building. So it's a huge added value for the municipality, because we have no place where we can operate a building at 100% if there was a power outage. And if it was a long-term power outage, this is where it becomes very practical for the community. Yes, you're confirming that the generators that we have today cannot be combined together to do the 100% power. No, we have nothing in our inventory that could help us operate 100% of the needs of the Uniplex. Thank you. Anyone else? If not, let's move on to the resolution. All those, it has been seconded, right. All those in favor of the resolution will say aye. Against, nay. Carried as presented. In 10.5.2, purchase of a generator for the sewage lift station. On Gulf Street. Here, Your Worship, is another generator that we're awarding a tender for purchase to Summers Generator Systems at a cost of $56,510 plus HST. In this case, it is a 55 kilowatt diesel generator, which will provide 24-hour electricity to the sewage lift station. So if the further amount is needed, it's because it will be provided for under the surplus in operations. So we have some space to be able to add if there's an additional cost. Thank you. To read this resolution, Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Thank you, Your Worship. The Council award the tender for the purchase of a generator and an automatic transfer switch to Summers Generator Systems Limited at the cost of $56,510 plus HST, pursuant to its proposal dated April 4, 2024, and authorize this expenditure be defrayed from the account number 2-2-95-93-4685, Water and Sewer Operating Budget, Lift Station, Gulf Street. I so move, Your Worship. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Turgeon-Roy, seconded by Councillor Le Boutillier on the question. There being none, all those in favor of the resolution will say aye. Against, nay. The resolution is carried as presented. Now, 10 point, oh, sorry, we just did that one. 10.6, heritage and partnerships. We're at 10.6.1 concerning policy A41-2024 entitled Corporate Visibility. And so what we're proposing is to replace policy A41-2024 by policy A-41-2024-1, where the corporate visibility policy does not apply to parks and trails of the city that had been requested during the first presentation of this policy, and that these places will not have any advertising. Thank you. For the reading of this resolution, Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. The Council repeal policy A41-2024 entitled Corporate Visibility and adopt the new policy A41-2024-1 entitled Corporate Visibility. I so move, Your Worship. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Genet on the question. On the question, Councillor Turgeon-Roy. I have a question. In reviewing the bylaw, I wondered, under roles and responsibilities of the city in point J, it stated that if the organization wanted to delegate to the city the responsibility of renting advertising space, we would do it, but we would provide a percentage of the funds. How are we going to manage that when we talk about may be shared? And wouldn't this be a kind of subsidy or grant? Why are we providing that option? This wording was added following discussions we had with some groups as to who should be responsible or who would be interested in looking for sponsorship. Would they do it themselves, as organizations do with their employees or their volunteers? Or if the city were a third party and there was going to be a tender involved with people who are specialized in finding sponsors like this. So if there were organizations, and some groups said to us, they don't have the resources to do this. They prefer that the city deal with it. Well, we don't have this internally either. So if we were to have a contract with a third party, according to the tender, then it would give us a certain percentage. And so we would confirm then with other groups what the percentage of revenue would go to the third party of the contract and the revenue that would go to the organization. So we do it on a case-by-case basis, but this wording was to allow us to do this. If a group did not want to be dealing with sponsorship, then that would be shared. That's why there's a could, a conditional verb tense there, because in our sponsorship kits, we identify which spaces belong to the city, which spaces belong to the groups. I think it's going to give people a way out, that we're not going to look after it. Well, this is where there's going to be a sharing or division of revenues. There has to be a discussion to determine what the percentage would be. And if something is going to a third party, then the municipality also get a part of it. Thank you. Councillor Godbout. Well, I was thinking along the same lines as Councillor Turgeon-Roy, partly because I say policies are in place to manage the people's behavior and what results are we looking for. So I see some risk in this section, in this paragraph. You know, I'm ready to let you manage this paragraph, but the risk I see is that we find ourselves in a situation where we wanted to delegate this to the organization and create opportunities to take any burden off the city employees. And I'm not sure we took that much burden away from city employees if we have too many organizations that are going to be invoking paragraph J. You know, they start organizing this and coordinating this and negotiating amounts. That was my first comment. So first of all, have we taken any organizational burden off municipal employees if we agree that many organizations who have an opportunity to take the opportunity to make some income and they in turn redelegate that back to the city? And delegate is a funny word in that paragraph. I'm not sure, we give them rights and they give them back to us. I'm not sure that's a delegation. Well, it's a funny way of doing things, and I'm wondering if we're really going to have if this means an indirect subsidy or grant to an organization, because at the end of it all, we're just going to, you organize it and we'll just take a share of what comes back to us. If we do this and the city coordinates, then it means it's an indirect subsidy. So we have a policy on grants and subsidies. So it's a risk in the policy for your administration if we go around our policy on grants and subsidies to organizations. I'm raising these 2 points. Maybe we could see how this works for a year. And if you want to try this, then I'm not sure it's going to give us the results we're looking for. I'm not sure we're directing people in the right way. I think we're going to be very giving occupying our staff. And I think it's an indirect grant or subsidy. So I launch you the challenge to look at these things, and maybe we could talk it over in another year's time and see if giving you the results that you were looking for. So that's one of my comments. I support the policy tonight, but I note that I'll look at it next year and ask how things played out and if all these risks materialized or no.
Ça serait plutôt sur l'article
My
7.
other question was about section 7.1, establishing directives and signage. Do we have any idea when you're going to have this implemented? We're talking about roles and responsibilities, those who manage the rental spaces, to establish rental or directives, guidelines. Oh, it's already done, and it's the linguistic policy that shapes that. And maybe in answer to your first question, but the whole issue, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to answer. No, it's a good observation. And something I want to tell you is that when you talked about indirect subsidies, there's no guaranteed income. So in other words, you have to go get it. And if the city has no income, say there's a third party that's chosen and they're responsible for looking for sponsors, an organization, for example, a baseball team that doesn't want to look after their own signage. Well, then we go to a third party. The third party says, look, I could get $50,000 and I'm going to keep 25, 35, or 50% of it for me. And the rest of the income that comes back to the city, we manage that, but no money goes to baseball if the revenue doesn't come out of the community. So there's no risk with regard to subsidies or grants. There's no cost to pay the third party. Yes, there's some administration, but there would be an administration even if we didn't have that third party. I simply wanted to specify that. There's no direct subsidy or grant involved. There are some organizations who have said to us that they don't even want to have that income. We have space for organizations, for example, that have no location. So we want to give an organization some space and go together with other organizations, so we want to allow them to go get some other income. So it's not a risk for the municipality. Quite the opposite. It's going to help us with regard to income and grants that we give other organizations to diversify the revenue streams for these organizations. I'm not sure if that clears up the risk or the worries that you have about this direct subsidy. Well, thank you. It makes things clear because I see the way you intend it to run, but it confirms the risk that I identified exists. Because if Baseball Dieppe, for example, says it doesn't want to be concerned and they want a third party to look after it and want a small 10% that gets back to them, then you have to align the 10% that goes back to them with their policy on subsidies. That's what I'm saying. Why do they have 10% if they're getting nothing? Because our encouragement here is for groups to do their share and they participate. So if someone doesn't participate and they still get a 10%, well, I think that's an indirect subsidy. Thank you. On the vote, all those who say aye, against nay, carried as presented. Brings us to bylaw, I'm sorry, to item 11.1.
Oui, monsieur. Donc, en janvier de cette année,
In January of this year, if you remember,
il y a moi et Madame
Catherine d'Entremont presented bylaw A17, Code of Ethics governing council members by the City of Dieppe.
Donc,
And so
donc en janvier, ça vous a été
in
fait,
January,
vous avez procédé aux deux premières
you were introduced to this. You did the first two readings by title, and we are now at the summary reading and third reading of the title today.
Lors de la présentation
During the
de
presentation of bylaw A17, the Code of Ethics, the only comment that came out at that point was that we wanted that the Francophone identity be named as an important value for members of council. And so we changed the Code of Ethics, and the strong adhesion to the Francophone identity was added. And you also should know that this bylaw for the Code of Ethics replaces the second part of the R4 procedural bylaw. So both work hand in hand. I'm talking about A17 that I'm presenting today and A4 that I'm presenting today. So if we pass or if we read these bylaws, you know, things are going to get complicated with regard to the application. Having said this, as I said a moment ago, today is the reading of the summary. You have the major facts in the summary, which will be read, and then you can then read bylaw A17, which is in front of you. There are no other changes or substantial amendments to the bylaw. The only element was the strong respect for Francophonie. Thank you very much. To read the summary, Councillor Genet. Thank you, Your Worship. Bylaw A17, 2024, Code of Ethics governing council members of the City of Dieppe. This code applies to all members of Dieppe City Council to include integrity, innovation, and the orientation of their the high standards of professional conduct, and to review the code and passing and taking measures concerning any infraction, the responsibility of members of council with regard to their conduct as members of council, the respect of the process, decision-making process through collegiality in decision-making and faithfulness in communicating it, as well as not involving council in personal opinions, conduct passed by members of council with regard to the administration, the use of communication means provided by the city in the exercise of their functions, the usage of social media, the necessity to respect the code, notably by way of conflict of interest and the signing of the formula. Thank you. The statement of commitment to the Code of Ethics. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Genet, seconded by, pardon me, Councillor Godbout.
Vous voulez appuyer?
You wanted to second? You wanted to talk about it too? Go ahead. Two comments. I truly want to thank the drafters of the edition. It was a really delicate thing, and you took a very difficult concept. You easily integrated it in the wording. I even took up my micro-Robert to look up the French word adhérer, and because the section that says other importance of a Francophone identity, Acadian identity, that the councillors strongly adhere to, and adhere to declare oneself in agreement with or a partisan of. So it's a very inclusive language. And this is what I think is going to happen when we balance all these interests. So congratulations. You very clearly can included what I had wanted. And secondly, I think it was very important to update Code of Ethics, and but we also should be looking at it again. And it reminds me of the good practices so that on a yearly basis, members are requested to comply with the code. And I think it's a good practice to do once the code is passed, that yearly we stop and look, because every time you read it, you see small things where you say, oh, well, I could do a little bit better there. And, if it's involved in our behavior. So I like the idea of doing this annually with each member.
Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I also support all of the comments by Councillor Godbout. I have a question, however, and perhaps I don't understand the definition of public servant, but we talk about members of council on page 228 under the 6 responsibilities of the members. At the end of the first paragraph, it says, as a public servant, the members must show a high level of morality in the exercise of their function. When we talk of elected officials, we should say elected officials or the responsible for the government. Which page are you on? Sorry. As an elected official, yes. Everybody agrees? Is that all, Mr. Thibodeau? Yes, thank you. Councillor de Boutier. Thank you, Your Worship. Well, as the confidentiality of the elected members and after their term, in section 4, and I'm just wondering if it includes everybody. It says that in section 4, if I have to find my notes here, and once again, to protect the city on closed files that were not settled, to make sure that there is no discussions afterward. This is included here. Does section 4 include that? Because when reading number, oh, where did it go here? Confidentiality, sorry. There's a lot of number 4s. The use of communication and confidential information, it says members must not use personal information for personal gain or for the gain of a other person or company. And once again, you've probably analyzed this yourself, but it says, oh, well, perhaps it's not a gain for me, it's not a gain for you, but so I can talk about it. Well, if you read the whole sentence, it says members are not to use personal information. So we're talking about personal identifiers, for example, for their personal gain. So you can't use that. You can't use any information that you've obtained in a closed or an open public meeting for your personal gain or for the gain of another person or body, corporate or physical person, or for your business. Now, of course, this is more for public confidential information, so it wouldn't be public meetings. You're right. These would be for in-camera sessions. But it says you can't make money with any personal information that you've obtained during a council meeting. Now, the next sentence, except as under the act or if authorized by municipal council. Normally, it would be prohibited to discuss or talk to the public, but in writing or in oral, to help to promote their personal interests or those or other persons during your mandate, so your term. So you can't use the information to make money or to help anybody else make money, including your family members. So it seems clear to me the use of confidential information cannot serve for your personal gain or for your family, or you cannot use that information to help anybody else. No, but no, I would, no, of course not. We wouldn't use that information, but it includes all of the information. Then all of the information that we've heard, yes, even after your term, the confidentiality remains. Yes, even more so. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. Yep. Sorry, I thought I didn't think I had another question, but I'd like to propose a change in Schedule A, where it says a statement of commitment to the Code of Ethics. And it says, I declare that as a member of Dieppe City Council, I have read and support the Code of Ethics governing council members. I find it fairly weak in terms of a commitment. So I said, I have read the Code of Ethics, I support it, and I commit, I promise that I will respect it. I will comply, and I commit to compliance. So would the council like to adopt that amendment, that change to Schedule A? Yes. So we've already read it a third time, so we can do this. Ms. Janin had already read it, and Ms. Godbout, Councillor Godbout had seconded. That was second lecture? No, that was summary reading. That was summary reading. So as proposed, as was just changed, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. So the third reading, it has been read a third time. No, it was summary reading. Our summary was read. We've already read the summary, and I was proposing that you move directly to third reading with the changes. So third reading by title only, including the changes, if you agree. All those in favor will signify. Opposed, nay. So that has been read. The summary has been read. And a third time. Next item on the agenda, notices of motion. No, actually, we're at 11.2, the second bylaw, the procedural bylaw, which is at 11.2, the procedural bylaw. Now, on this, Your Worship, This is bylaw A4, the procedural bylaw. It was also read for a first and second time by title last January. So as a DSET, we now have to read the summary and then read it by title only. In January, you might remember you had asked a number of questions, several questions. And in order to clarify them, as a response to those questions, we've made a few changes. There's also a few changes that we are proposing here today that are the following. The meeting of the second Monday in January is very early in the year. There's almost no staff. People are back not from holidays, so we propose that we cancel the first meeting of the year. A lot of people are missing, councillors are missing, staff are not back, but it's just an idea here. So that would be at section 4. Now, the questions from the public, there's a point that is questions from the public. I've added 2 sub-points because since the pandemic, if you'll remember, we had added questions that were asked on the phone or on the web. People can ask questions virtually, and I read them out, and just so that we don't forget them, we'll include them in the agenda of, and as you see on page 300. Another element that had raised some questions was the election of the deputy mayor. You'll remember I had checked the act and I noticed that the secret ballot vote is not allowed under the Local Governance Act. So I don't recommend that method because it's against the law. So I brought back the motion I had made at the time, the proposal I had made at the time, but I made it clearer and I added a minor process for people who want to run for the position of deputy mayor, to allow them to say a few words, but the act stipulates that you do it by a raised hand. And I checked to see what the other cities do, and I did check. A few of them do it properly. A few of them don't do it properly, but I certainly can't recommend that you do it the same way as the cities that don't follow the act, the Local Governance Act. So from here on in, when there is an annual election for a deputy mayor, I would recommend then that you use this new procedure, and which would be to vote by a show of hands at a public meeting. And the public, the questions asked by people who are present or virtually will be on the agenda itself. I also talked about notices of motion. This is something that is a little controversial, and it's difficult for us because the way we use notice of motions currently is that you get a motion. Most of the time, we recommend that you table them instead of moving on them, because an amendment of a policy or a bylaw requires us to do our work, our analysis, our background work, in order to be able to recommend different options and the best option. You'll remember that I had talked about preceding the tabling of new bylaws, including amended bylaws or policies, to have them preceded by a notice of motion at a previous meeting. Now, this would also respond to your request, which is to allow you more time to look at a policy instead of receiving it on the Thursday, to read it, to analyze it all weekend long, and then ask your questions on the Monday, and not having time to give it the attention that is necessary. A policy is a document that that is used for municipal management and to standardize the administration. So in section 25, almost the last one, you'll notice that I added a procedure for the notice of motion that is clear, that will allow administration to do their work better and to propose these amendments that have been thought about, that have been properly assessed, and that will be the best options that we have to present. So those are the biggest changes. Now, there's been a couple of typos, a couple of other corrections, minor corrections. For example, there's another, some words have been changed. I had to write the name of each councillor for each vote. So anyhow, I lightened the load for the just the editorial process, and also to allow you to become aware of the changes. I had made a presentation in January. I updated it, and it's now at page 317 of your package. So there's a presentation on the highlights, the changes, and I just explained essentially what are the important changes in this that we're proposing to this bylaw. Now, I talked about it in January, but it wasn't modified at the time, but I can just point out that in the bylaw, so there might be some councillors who remember this, I integrated an order of priority of interventions during the debate. You know that we use the Bourrineau procedure, and this is the same procedure that the House of Commons uses in Ottawa. And so I prepared a little card for the order of priority of motions according to Bourrineau, like you can use that, like at the House of Commons, and at least you'll be better equipped. And this is the Bourrineau code, but on one page, on a one pager with all the rules. It's clear and it's concise, and it'll be helpful.
Absolument.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're at the reading of the summary, which is on page 280. To read this summary, who would like to do it? Councillor Godbout. Yes, summary of bylaw A424, procedural bylaw of the Dieppe Municipal Council. The main changes affecting the bylaw are the following. Definitions, limiting words which require definition to those which create confusion or ambiguity. Passing a new bylaw to the structure of the procedural bylaw of the Dieppe Local Governance Act, rules which affect the behavior of members of council will be found in bylaw A17/2024 in the Code of Ethics. The assistant mayor voting will be done in public by raising your hand. The insertion of a new paragraph dealing with the Copyright Act in Canada, deliberations of council. The members have to comply with the order of priority of proposals and motions. Quorum, it is suggested to go from 15 minutes to 30 minutes in order to determine if there's a quorum. Notice of motion. Every first reading of a new bylaw, of a bylaw modifying or canceling another bylaw, or passing or adopting any policy or policy amendment must be preceded by notice of motion given by a member of council without a seconder at a preceding meeting, Where is join the draft bylaw or policy without reading or debate on the document or any other explanation. Withdrawal or cancellation of the meeting on the second Monday of January. I so move the summary of the bylaw A4. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thibodeau. All those in favor of the summary as such will say aye. Against nay. So the summary is passed and represents a lot of changes that we are going to have to deal with by modernizing our procedures. Thank you so much. We now go to third reading by title, moved by Councillor Godbout, seconded by Councillor Thibodeau. For third reading, last reading, by title alone.
Arrêté procédural du conseil municipal.
Procedural bylaw of the Dieppe Municipal Council, bylaw A-4 2024. I so move the third reading. Thank you. Moved third and last reading by Councillor Godbout, seconded by Councillor Thibodeau. I was just waiting that for your head nod on the question. There being none, all those in favor will say aye or against nay. I didn't hear a yes, though. It will take at least one aye. Seriously. I know you're all tired, and I can be tiring. So altogether, we've agreed to pass third reading by title alone. And unless I'm mistaken, we are now at notice of motion. One last time. We have received none, which brings us now to the time we give the floor to members of council for their 4 minutes of glory. Councillor Le Boutillier. Yes. Nothing from me tonight. Thank you. Councillor Genet. Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to wish everyone a good day, a good Earth Day. Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. I simply want to congratulate the women's hockey team, M13, which won the New-Brunswick Championship on the weekend. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. Councillor Turgeon-Roy. Nothing from me this week. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Godbout. I have some things to share with councillors tonight. I wanted to go back to the meetings I had with the police authority and share some information that we had at our last meeting. I think that you will find this interesting. For some now, well, in the last 18 months or so, we've been working at open source data to have access to information that the RCMP has on the different things that are happening, that incidents that are happening in the cities and in the region, to see the areas of the city that are busier, if you will, where their presence of the RCMP is more wanted or desired. And so this information we've not always had. In the past, we've had issues at getting it. But the RCMP in Moncton, not many municipalities have the RCMP as a municipal force. So it's an anomaly. We had some requests that the national RCMP were not getting these kinds of requests, and we didn't get much attention. So we got information at the last meeting that the open source data or access to this information is going to be happening, which will allow the policing authority to make more information accessible to the public and make more information open to others. So at the outset, we only had the announcement that it was coming, but I wanted to share this with you because this is something that the Policing Commission has worked on. I also wanted to add that we passed the strategic plan at last Thursday's meeting. The recommendations put forward by the city to the Police Commission, in my opinion, when I review the planning strategy, that if the recommendations are not directly addressed, they are at least indirectly addressed, and they can be addressed in the work plans. So I'm sure that the CRPA will be able to come back with information, and the meetings that are scheduled in the coming months for the 3 municipalities together, allowing them to meet with the CRPA and its representatives to discuss the various issues that we have. So good work by the municipalities, by the CRPA, and all people involved. We all seem to be working to collaborate together and moving forward with projects that were not moving forward as quickly as we had hoped in the past. But at the last meeting, and as elected members, we have to remember, and I'm mentioning this because in the superintendent's report, he stated, and maybe you'll see in the social media, come and have a coffee with the RCMP members, come and do a workout with members, see what they do. A lot of this is related to the fact that in their recruitment phase, they're looking for people and guarantee that if you go do your training in Regina at Depot, we guarantee you'll come back to New Brunswick or a specific site. And so this encourages recruitment. We had a lot of success. Things are going well for recruitment in Moncton, but there was an issue in the last couple of weeks, and people want to come back to Moncton because of the uncertainty about keeping the RCMP in Moncton in the future. So this questioning was happening over the couple of weeks, and it came out in social media, and it had an effect on recruitment. We have to think about this when we talk to the public and say to the public, I'm not aiming the people around the table here, but in the greater Moncton area, the way we communicate our issues with the CRPA, it will have an impact on our recruitment, and they all start to wonder if the RCMP is their future. It was an interesting comment to share with you. So in the strategic plan, in the coming weeks, I'm going to tell you what the main objectives are in the future. Secondly, I wanted to thank the people who undertook the audit. It's important for us to have confidence in our auditors, and I like the presentation and the information they provided, and congratulations to Finance for the prudent way you've been managing our finances. You got an A+ mark tonight, and I really appreciate the importance of it, and we appreciate your prudent management of our funds for taxpayers. I also want to congratulate volunteers. There was a great ceremony. I want to thank the organizers of that ceremony. It went really well, and we noticed that we were really integrated, so we felt that we had been heard. So thank you very much, and thank you for hearing counsel on this, and we could see this happening over the course of the evening. So the last message is Happy Earth Day, but more important, happy birthday to my husband this evening. We all have to do life council balance. I'm sure he'll forgive me. He'll forgive me for being here tonight, and so happy birthday to my husband. I can't do any better than you all did tonight. Mr. Lantang, Councillor Lantang, are you there? We asked the question, but we didn't get an answer earlier. Maybe you heard it, but I asked. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Lantang, and good evening to you all.
Oui, hein?